Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Adult Sunday School lesson for May the 10th, 2026. It's an Old Testament lesson from the book of Psalms entitled Scripture. We are in the midst of Eastertide 2026. That is the period of time that began Easter Sunday and will conclude with the Feast of Pentecost that we celebrate on May the 24th. These days are called Eastertide because during these times we learn more about our spiritual walk as a result of the miraculous events of Easter. Our lesson writer for this month is Reverend Joseph LaGuardia, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church at Vero Beach, Florida. He was also our lesson writer during the month of March. So we've benefited from his writings for the last few weeks. He has entitled this unit, Paths of Righteousness. In these 5 weeks of May, we are exploring paths of righteousness from the book of Psalms, or how to appropriate the promises of God from the book of Psalms. And our writer says that this is what Eastertide is all about, learning more about discipleship. Last week we had the longest chapter in the Bible, Psalm 119, with its 176 verses, dealing with Scripture. Today we're going to look at Psalm 63, which deals with prayer, which may be considered the strength we get from prayer. Then we will look at holiness, spirit, and compassion to end the month. The book of Psalms is our companion as we journey together to the Feast of Pentecost. Each lesson reveals a key to right living, and today it is prayer, or what we can learn about prayer from Psalm 63. The book of Psalms, as you might know, is a songbook for ancient Israel, and it's also a songbook for us. The book of Psalms is the first book in the third division of the Jewish scriptures called the writings. They have the law, the prophets, and the writings. These writings, which include Psalms, Proverbs, and some other books that I'll list in a subsequent slide, were the last writings to be incorporated into the Old Testament canon. They present a wide diversity of subjects and authors, if for no other reason because of their vast number. There's 150 Psalms in the Hebrew Scriptures. With the advent or the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found even more Psalms that are not included in the canon. But today's Psalm is Psalm 63. This Psalm is one of many that express assurance amid suffering. So the author is oppressed, suffering, being threatened from the inside and from out. And so he seeks protection and vindication from God. And he expresses what he finds in very eloquent terms. These Psalms of assurance are many in number. They include Psalm 23, which is perhaps the favorite psalm of all the psalms, and even 139, Psalm 139, which is the basis for a wonderful modern song, On the Wings of the Dawn. I can't read Psalm 63 without thinking about Psalm 139. These songs, poems of assurance, are not coming from inexperienced optimism, but rather the assurance expressed is the result of passing through heartaches and sorrows. These Psalms, at least in Book 2, from which Psalm 63 comes, uses the name Elohim for God, not Yahweh. So there's some indication that these Psalms come from the northern tribes of Israel. But Psalm 63 is powerful in showing God as protector, provider, and even vindicator for the righteous. Again, I'm basing much of my commentary on this book from Dr. Francisco, Introducing the Old Testament, which has been a good resource for me throughout my Bible studies. The Hebrew Scriptures include the law, the prophets, and the writings, as we've mentioned, and we need to remember that the Psalms is part of the division of Scripture called the writings. You can see that it includes several books, some that we might call books of prophecy, such as Daniel, and some that we might call historical books, such as Ezra, Nehemiah, or even Chronicles. But these came into the Old Testament canon late after the law and the prophets. Psalm 63 is a love song to God, who is named Elohim in this psalm. It's called a Psalm of David, and I've put this in a subdued text to indicate that it doesn't necessarily mean that David wrote the psalm, but it means that it may be in the style of the psalms that David wrote, or it may be used during the time of David. But we'll say that it is a Psalm of David when he was in the wilderness, or that means when he was suffering from enemy oppression. But like David and many other figures in the Old Testament, sometimes we are in the wilderness, that is, we're having problems, difficulties, due to our own poor choices. Sometimes it's due to the evil of others who are oppressing us, and sometimes we could be suffering just because of mere chance or circumstance. But regardless of cause, Psalm 63 assures us that God is with us, protecting us, abiding with us, and will vindicate us. I can't read this psalm without thinking of that modern hymn, The Wings of the Dawn. This hymn was written in 1985. We've sung it in worship many times. When I was in the choir, I would love singing it because of its soaring refrain of praise and assurance. And though The Wings of the Dawn is really set to Psalm 139, it certainly is appropriate as we look at Psalm 63. Dr. Francisco says that at one time the Psalms were considered as prayers. And indeed, if you look at Psalm 72, the very last verse there, it says, "This concludes the prayers of David," indicating that this is a summary for many of the Psalms that appeared. So I think it's appropriate that our lesson writer is choosing the book of Psalms to talk about prayer, because there have been times in my life, and even now, that I read the Psalms not so much as a song of praise, but as a prayer for help. And so it's totally appropriate that we look at Psalm 63 as a prayer. This psalm is in the second division of the Psalms. I mentioned last week how of the 150 Psalms, they're divided into 5 books, which kind of parallels the 5 books of the law of Moses. But Psalm 63 comes right in the middle of this second division in the book of Psalms. It bears the title Psalms of David, and Dr. Francisco says that this was probably a compilation of psalms used for tabernacle and temple services. In these psalms, the name Elohim predominates. David, of course, from the southern kingdom, he would have referred to God by the great name of God, Yahweh, probably. So these psalms that use Elohim may not be from the pen of David exactly, but they do express some of the situations that David went through. So part 1 of this psalm, verses 1 through 4, you may be summarized by saying this is an expression of longing for God. The psalmist is seeking earnestly after God as his soul thirsts. Like a dry land that needs water, the psalmist's soul needs to experience the presence of God in order to even function as an adult. So let's read these verses. Longing for God, verses 1 through 4 of Psalm 63 says, O God, Elohim, you are my God. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you. So that is the beginning section of the psalm. We'll read the rest of it later. In verse 1, we see a simple yet eloquent confession of total dependence upon God. He uses the term soul and flesh, not just part of our being, but our total personhood, comprised of body, soul, spirit, whatever it is, seeks for God. We need total dependence upon God. Verse 2, notice that this insight came while in the temple or in the sanctuary. And this causes me to think that there is something divinely powerful at church during worship. And the commentators on this psalm say that the writer may have had a revelation, an epiphany, some type of a theophany or experience of the presence of God while he was at synagogue or sanctuary that empowered him. This psalm expresses an insight of disciplined devotion. That is, he hasn't gone all of his life and then suddenly seeks for God. No, daily and constantly he's seeking the presence, advice, and help of the Lord. The commentators calls this the practice of the presence of God. I wish that in my life that I would develop this practice of the presence of God as a continual thing and not just a sometimes thing, not just when I'm in need, but regardless of the situation I'm in. To be aware of God's presence is a spiritual maturity that evidently this poet or the writer of this psalm had mastered, at least to some degree. This experience of God was real to him. He beheld and saw God's presence. These two verbs appear in the verses that I read that signify total experience, not just fleeting experience or not just catching God's eye, but the poet experienced in a deep way, not just a shallow way, the experience and blessing of God. It looks something like this. He says that his soul without God is like a dry, thirsty land without water, kind of like this picture. And in fact, the commentators say that the absence of God in his life brings him agony. So he must experience God in order to be comfortable in life. So this is the setup or the beginning of this psalm and the power that prayer can give us as it helps us understand and experience the presence of God in our life. Again, Dr. Francisco says that the titles of the Psalms, such as Psalms of David, are not part of the inspired texts, but were added by later editors to the book of Psalms. But there is a message in the Psalms that mirrors the soul needs of humanity of all ages, not just during the time of David. It is because of this truth, that is, that the Psalms apply to all of us throughout the ages. It's because of this truth that the book of Psalms has been so helpful to so many people through the ages. Its truth does not belong to time or a specific time, but to all times or eternity. So says Dr. Francisco. So now we're looking at part 2, where the psalmist, through his prayer, finds God, verses 5 through 8. These verses say, "My soul is satisfied as with a rich feast, and my mouth praises you with joyful lips. When I think of you on my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me." So that is a confident expression of the presence of God. God's presence with the poet is not limited to the sanctuary. That's another mature learning of the spiritual life. We don't have to come to church to experience God. And in fact, these verses indicate God is with him in daily tasks and even in going to bed. Notice God's indwelling and empowerment for the whole person. He says his body is feasted with fat and richness, some translations say, because of the presence of God in his life. His mouth joyfully praises God. His mind meditates throughout the day and night, through all the watches of the night, not just when he goes to sleep at night, but even during the times when he may not even be awake. His mind meditates on the blessings and presence of God, and his soul clings to God as a source of safety and protection. Body, mouth, mind, and soul. Again, these are poetic parallelisms that express the total dependence of the psalmist on the presence of God. It is a second and great insight of the poet that he is wholly dependent upon God. Not just partially, but wholly dependent on God for all aspects of his life. In fact, he feels that he is protected by God under the shadow of his wings and by his right hand. If you were to Google or look at this image of shadow of God's wings, you might see some examples of a bird flying and overhead and protecting us. I believe the original image was not that, but was one of the Ark of the Covenant, on which the seraphim wings of angels were spread out over the Holy of Holies, or the mercy seat of God. And so the writer may have seen this ark in the temple and saw the mercy seat. And so he saw the wings of the seraphim on the ark as God's protective covering and yielding, and that means living underneath the shadow of the wings is one way of saying living under God's protection. So he's approached God, he's understood some things about God, he sees how God is totally with him, and now he moves to a new threat, verses 9 through 11. These verses say, "But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be prey for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult. For the mouths of liars will be stopped." Wow. Our lesson writer says that this new threat is perhaps the real reason for the psalmist to write this psalm. The new enemies, the new threat, whatever it is not specifically identified, but the poet knows God will deal with them. They will become the jackal's portion. That is, they will become battlefield scraps. They will be overcome and amount to nothing, they being those who are threatening the life of the psalmist. Verse 11 gives a clue to the offense of the enemies. They are liars and slanderers who God will punish. There's a confidence in the vindication coming from the Lord, from the hand of the Lord. And it is a universal truth that God will vindicate the faithful. So the psalmist has moved from a desire to be with God and agony without God to an awareness of how God is strengthening and abiding with him, to a hope and promise that those who are oppressing him will be found out, punished by God. Those who seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals or foxes, it says. Jackals get nothing but scraps. So this psalm indicates that those who are circling about and trying to hurt, obstruct, punish the psalmist will be the ones who will suffer. God will vindicate the righteous. So I hope that you will join a Sunday school class or other discussion group in order to add your comments and input to these sessions. We know that we have classes available here at First Baptist Church Middletown for every age group. You'd be welcome to join a class if you're not already in one. And I do thank you for joining me today. Don't take me too seriously, but because I have no seminary degree or other professional religious qualification, but I am an amateur layperson. That is, a person who loves doing this. I do not make my living through religious teaching or learning about the Bible, but it has been a significant part of my life for many years. This lesson makes fair use, I should say, of some copyrighted material for educational purposes only. I do hope that you will pray for yourself, pray for others, pray for all of our endeavors at the church, and I hope to see you next week as we continue our study in the book of Psalms during the month of May. I do thank the Reverend Darrell Elster, who is seminary trained and our Minister of Education and Technology for his faithful work week by week in producing, directing, and recording these sessions on YouTube. Thank you, Reverend Elster. Until next week, I'll say goodbye.